Hi, thank you for joining us here at Diamond Webinars. We've got a good show in store for you today. This is our fourth in the overall series of webinars here at Diamond, but the first in our core services lineup. We'll be touching on our newest and most exciting area of practice here at Diamond, augmented, virtual, and mixed reality. Before we get started, some logistics. We have an ASL interpreter that you'll notice on the screen and closed captions. You're welcome to pin the ASL video so that you can see it at all times, and use the gallery view if you don't see the whole panel. Also, note the Q&A feature below. Go ahead and submit questions at any time during the presentation. We'll be reviewing them and passing them along to the panelists. Let's get started. So welcome. For those of you who are unaware, Diamond is a digital agency built by developers with a commitment to well-crafted, accessible, and inclusive software, always built on best practices. For nearly a decade, we've supported media companies, large brand names who rely on us for product strategy, experience design, and full stack development services. We've become well known for building cloud-based media systems, video players, and more. Our team's also known for working and playing at the cutting edge of technology. XR offers so much in so many areas for entertainment, gaming, fitness, enterprise, and more. Personally, in the fitness area, I lost over 25 pounds last year within the first few months of getting my own VR headset. It's an exciting time. We see XR as a natural progression and are excited to add it to our list of services. Let's review the agenda for today. Looking over the agenda, we're going to set our focus on the combination of augmented and virtual reality. We'll touch on accessibility considerations and how XR fits into a post-COVID world. We'll have a panel with Joanna Popper and Joanna Popper of HP and Christina Heller of MetaStage. But before we begin, while many in the audience may be familiar with augmented, virtual, or mixed reality, we don't want to assume. So let me introduce Chadwick Turner, who's helping to lead our XR practice and can help bring the audience into the conversation. Chadwick?
Thank you, Jonathan. So to understand where we are at, let's quickly look at where we came from. In the 1860s, people were able to see 3D images. In 1896, cinema was born. In the 60s, audiences could watch 360 videos. And in the 70s, homes now had video games and cinemas had special effects. In 84, Jaron Lanier coined the term VR. In 87, NASA developed a VR headset and haptic gloves, followed shortly by consumer versions from Mattel and Nintendo. But in 2007, the iPhone changed everything. This tech enabled the creation of modern VR headsets like the Oculus Rift and the HP Reverb. More recently, these smartphones are powering augmented reality experiences, but the world has changed. Our immersive theaters are no longer spinning. Our XR arcades no longer have folks wearing headsets and backpacks, and Apple's recent keynote had no audience. XR professionals are consistently asked, can VR be the platform for the future of work and play? So I'm thrilled to have one of the heads of VR at HP, Joanna Popper, join us, as well as the CEO of MetaStage, Christina Heller. So we have a 4-person panel moderated by Jonathan DeArmas. Jonathan is a partner at Diamond, one of the smartest people in the development of crazy cool technologies. With Diamond diving headfirst into XR solutions, I can't wait to see what Diamond develops. Joanna Popper is one of the most influential people in XR and is head of virtual reality for location-based entertainment at HP. I'm excited to learn about her thoughts regarding the future of location-based entertainment in a post-COVID world. Christina Heller is one of the earliest entrepreneurs in our recent XR renaissance, and as the CEO of MetaStage, one of the world's premier volumetric capture studios. She has an incredible amount of experience regarding how to build scalable XR solutions. And then there's myself. I'm Chadwick Turner. I'm an XR entrepreneur that recently joined Diamond's XR practice. I've worked in 360 video, virtual, and augmented reality, and several other technologies that we'll discuss today. So with that, I think we're ready, and we're all excited to start the conversation. Jonathan, take it away.
Absolutely. So welcome, Christina, Joanna. Thank you for being here today. So I guess we'll kind of open it up. We got a little bit of an overview of the history of XR, and I'm just curious. I mentioned how one thing that I got into was fitness when I first put on my headset, and I was just curious, Joanna, maybe if you open it up, what got you into this field, and what are your thoughts?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for hosting. This is great, and so glad that you've made it so much more accessible to people with Kate here. So I'm very into VR fitness today. I've been, I think I'm on day 50 something of working out in VR consecutive with Supernatural by Within. So very excited about that. And actually the connection of body and spirit and the virtual experience is something that I find incredibly compelling. That's not what first got me into VR though. My origin story in virtual reality. I was an executive at NBC Universal for a long time. I led marketing for one of the brands there, and then moved to Silicon Valley and was working at Singularity University for a bit, and had tried VR for the first time when I was still at NBC and gotten more and more into it and was working on different projects and realized that intersection of media and technology, of telling stories in a new and innovative way, of looking at what was next, was where my true passion was. And I went on what I call probably 30 coffees. And I just started using LinkedIn and to message everyone who worked in the field, and also went to all of the events. So back when we used to go to events, CES, South by Southwest, Sundance, many of the same events that I was actually already attending, either as a tech exec or as a media exec, but with a different frame, with the frame of let me see as much virtual reality as possible. And at that point, a couple of years ago, it was even less accessible than it is today. I didn't yet have hardware at home. And actually Christina was one of the people that I had a call with. I think that we first met on we'd probably seen each other, but we had a call during those 30 calls, and really rapidly into that, I became incredibly clear that this was the field I wanted to work in next. There was specifically because this field was about creating the future of storytelling, creating the future of media, creating the future of computing, and was going to have an outsized impact on the world. And that the people working in the field were imaginative, creative, dreamers who were all about, let's create a new future, a more inclusive future, a more accessible future. Let's do it right this time. We're now on our fourth wave we're heading into our fourth wave of computing. And so I wanted to be part of the group that was going to build this future. I believe that the impact of media and technology on all of us, how we see ourselves, our own self-image, our view of ourselves in the world, how we see the rest of the world, and how our own sense of belonging and our sense of, what we can achieve is deeply impacted by media and technology. And I believe, this wave will even have an even deeper impact on all of us and all of that, because of the interactive, immersive impact that this type of technology will have. So that was probably now, 3-4 years ago that I'm talking about, and very excited to be part of this great field, this great community, and working at HP and getting to have an impact.
Yeah, you definitely did it, Joanna. You are definitely part of the crew that is ushering this into existence. So good on you. It's sort of funny. I'm like the opposite of Joanna. She's in there like working out in a Supernatural every day. I'm the one that when I put on my Oculus Quest always goes into stationary mode. Like I am laying in bed, stationary mode. Now I'm in VR. But I think that is also part of the accessibility conversation, right? Is that,
Absolutely.
you put it in stationary mode and still feel like you can travel and move around just as well as somebody who's moving in their 6 degrees of freedom space. So for me, my entry was in, like so many, with new frontiers at Sundance. I tried VR for the first time in January 2014, and it was the Beck experience made by, I think it was a Chris Milk, and then also Secret Location did the production on that. And it's the classic 360 video intro to VR. I put the headset on and I realize, like, I'm on stage with Beck, and then I turn around and there's the audience behind me, and the jaw drops, and suddenly your mind explodes with what is coming and what's possible for immersive technology. And so, much like Joanna, I was really attracted to being one of the early pioneers during what I've using a term I learned from Marcy Jastrow, start state. This idea where everybody's equal and we're all learning together. That was just really, really compelling as somebody who'd been working in basically multimedia forms of content. My background was in documentary and journalism, and so now with Metastage, it's kind of a nice natural extension of that, because at Metastage, which you can see right there behind me, we capture real people and authentic performances and bring those into three-dimensional XR worlds. So yeah, I mean, it's exciting. I think with all technology, there's always things that bring us together and are really exciting from an evolutionary standpoint. And then there's also always things we need to be like, looking out for. What are the ways that this might be disruptive and not the best way for our society? So I'd like to think that people like me and Joanna, and also on this the kinds of topics we're tackling today, we're helping to make sure this very powerful and exciting new technology is doing the right things, for us as people.
Absolutely, yeah. I find it's really interesting. If everybody will notice the stage behind Christina. That's a really amazing, like, volumetric capture. They can get an amazing 3D. Would you speak a little bit to that? I think it's really interesting to hear a little bit more about what Metastage is doing.
Yeah, so volumetric video, or volumetric capture, is a way of taking, like I said, real people and real performances, and taking those authentic performances and bringing them into like augmented or virtual reality environments, or anything where a 3D asset is going to be useful. We use 106 cameras, all facing in on a performer like a globe, and we capture. So cool. And we capture that performance from every possible angle. And what you get on the other side is a 3D asset that has all the integrity of whatever happened live on stage. So, as we move into kind of more digital worlds and art, artificial intelligence and all of these artificial things, volumetric is like the real person's place and inside these virtual worlds.
Very cool. Very cool.
And Christina, you actually mentioned, when we were talking earlier about, in this new environment, you're open for business. You found that there are best practices that can be done for cleanliness, et cetera. And also probably some of the studios are trying to figure out, if I can't put 100 actors on stage or on set at the same time, are there ways for me to capture them individually and then fix it in post? Can you speak to that a bit? I'm sure that plenty of folks are trying to figure out, is VR the solution for me, now that we have to think not just as VR as supplemental, but probably maybe as the primary tool for collaboration?
Well, Metastage closed for about 2 months when COVID first hit, because like so many, we were just all like in the data and gathering stage, like what is happening. And then, it quickly became a conversation of, how can we take our current production process and make it COVID friendly? Luckily, volumetric is inherently much more hygienic and COVID friendly than other production methods, because we have this stage that essentially acts like a barrier and protects the performer. You can't get close to the performer anyway. So we've adopted a few best practices. One is as few people on stage as possible. So only essential personnel. That means the people that are participating in capture talent, director, everybody else, if you're on the creative side for the clients, or even me, because I don't actually push the buttons on the computer, we all are now tuning in through Zoom. And actually, we're going to give Evercast a go shortly as well. So doing the idea more remote viewing in. And that actually has some interesting benefits too. It allows people from around the world who might not be able to be present on the production to like weigh in and feel like they're involved. So again, it's only essential personnel. Obviously, masks are mandated for anybody who isn't on stage performing. We have physical distancing, which is nice because we have a large studio. So we're able to make sure that nobody's like clustered together, even when they're physically on set. We ask as much as possible that talent come hair and makeup ready. We have everybody sign waivers that says they haven't knowingly been exposed to COVID in the last 14 days. And then hand sanitizer and gloves and eyewear and that for as needed. As far as, so if you're looking at volumetric capture for what are our more common methods of distribution, like augmented and virtual reality, we've done a number of productions now this month using the COVID protocol, and it's been going very, very well. As far as whether it can supplement for a traditional production, like a movie or a TV show, I still think you have to take into account that it will be a more stylized look. It's not going to have the same fidelity as like an Alexa camera, like trained right on your face. We actually are doing a few projects right now that have a traditional framed distribution point. But again, the artists are taking into account that the look will be a little bit more digitized and stylized than what we're used to seeing in traditional production.
That's very interesting. Joanna, I assume, excuse me, similar question to you. It's the normal, like when I heard about the HP Reverb, my first thought was, oh my gosh, the screen door effect, it's going away. And for those of you not familiar with that, it's when you put on a headset and you can see kind of the lines between the pixels. So there's the fanboys like me that have had the Oculus DK1, DK2, and every time there's an announcement like that, I get excited. Have you noticed a substantial new clientele that have shown up and are intrigued by these devices because of the new world we're in?
Yes, definitely. I would say what we've seen is that there's an acceleration of interest in virtual reality and remote collaboration tools. There's a lot of different remote collaboration tools. We're using one right now. It's called Zoom. We're all super familiar with it. If for some reason we weren't familiar with it 3.5 months ago, we're very familiar now. Virtual reality takes on there's different reasons that you would use virtual reality as a remote collaboration tool. What we've seen though is in very strong acceleration of interest in virtual reality. Specifically, there's sort of 4 user buckets that we're seeing acceleration in. One is VR empowering learning. And so that can be both in the enterprise environment or in a school environment, right? So from one day to the next or 1 week to the next, students all around the world, nearly 90% of students are not in their schools right now. And right now, specifically, it may be summer in some cases, but when school ended, nearly 90% of students around the world were not on campus or going to school anymore. In enterprise frame, about 30% of people think that they'll be working from home in some cases, into 2021, at least part of the week. So you have a whole universe of people who are no longer going to the locations where they were before and figuring out how to train them. Has shifted in importance in a big way. So it's going from that very traditional methods in most cases to new methods. And what we know is that virtual reality drives much higher retention rates. So, on average, when you do an experience, which in virtual reality, you have that experience of doing something, of interacting with it, you have about a 75% retention. If you read a book, you have about 5% retention. And if you watch a presentation like this one, you have 10% retention. So everyone remember which 10% they're going to want to keep, because that's all you're going to get from us today, and sadly, we see virtual reality empowering people to learn. And so we have universities coming to us and buying a HP laptop plus a VR headset as their starter kit for all of their students, so that they can continue that learning. We have enterprise who was looking at how do I continue to train people, how do I continue to empower them? And they're coming and you know, they already were looking at VR in many cases. There's tremendous ROI for enterprise training, for medical, for vocational skills, for, you know, so many for architecture, engineering, construction, so many areas, but we're seeing an acceleration there. So learning is a big bucket. Creation, you know, anyone who's using product development, architecture, engineering, construction, essentially where you need to pre-visualize a product before it exists, whether it's real estate or you know, some other type of product. So we're seeing an intensification in creation as well. Collaboration. So how do people get together? You know, those of us who maybe were in offices before, we don't have that experience of getting to be live right now, together with others to brainstorm, to have water cooler moments. And so, you know, collaborating, whether, you know, on whiteboards in environments is very useful for people, or even going into social VR experiences where you get to have still have some team building, some team camaraderie. And then we also see, that connection, you know, and for some people that's gaming, you know, Steam VR had had an additional 1 million people come in April, and it maintained in May. Many of the sites like Steam VR, like VR Chat, have seen all-time concurrent users at a high. So, you know, so VR enabling people to learn, to create, to collaborate, and to connect are some of the big trends that we're seeing acceleration in across the board.
To speak to the learning specifically for myself, I went to VRLA a couple of years back, and there was a demonstration, a company that does training, virtual training for DJ equipment, of all things, right? If you can imagine these DJ setup tables with about 1 million little levers and switches, and you know, how many records can I choose? Well, you put on a headset, and you're led through an instructor-led, not AI, but an actual human on the other side wearing a headset who's not even in your location. And they're teaching you how to use a virtual set deck that's in front of you. Then you take off the headset, and what they've done at VRLA is they've removed a cover over an actual DJ setup. And they say, here's your records, go. And you have to do a crossfade with no train wreck. Forgive me for the technical DJ words. I learned them myself. Talk about retention, right? But I was able to do it immediately, and I could do it today, which is kind of wacky.
Well, that's really interesting you say that. You know, there's stats for people who are training, whether they be in medical school or they are actually, you know, already doctors but learning a new, you know, how to work in a new surgical tool. And I think the stats were something like, you know, a year later, if you learned in virtual reality, you still had 80% retention, versus if you learn a traditional method, you know, maybe 2 weeks later, you already, you know, lost most of it. So when you think of something important, like, you know, let's go we're going to the surgeon to get our, you know, to get a surgery. Do you want that surgeon, you know, do you want him or her to have been trained in VR and remember it really well, or, you know, you're taking your chances? And for something also very important, like DJing, you know, all these years later, because VRLA hasn't happened in a few years now.
Exactly.
You remember how to DJ. So when we come to the party at your house, we'll have a good experience there as well.
Was
I
it
look forward to a time we can do that.
Thing was called
I believe, yes.
Yeah, I was just on a panel with the founder of Tribe, and yeah, so that's awesome. That I'll make sure to tell him. I'm sure he would be so stoked to hear that.
It was an excellent example of that retention that you mentioned, Joanna. I think that you know, I'm really looking forward to getting into more of that enterprise and the digital twin stuff as well. You touched on digital twin. I'm not sure if by name, but when you're working on the large scale projects that, you know, really expensive things to build, you can't build the thing as a prototype necessarily. Airplanes, large buildings, you can build them in virtual reality though, and be one-to-one size and experience and travel through them. So it's really neat to think about all of what's opened up in that area. But just a quick note for the audience. I just want to remind everybody that we have the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. Go ahead and submit questions. We'll get to the Q&A in just a few moments. But Joanna, you made me think of something. When I think of education and when I think of training and and a new technology, I have to think of accessibility. It just kind of comes naturally because everybody is entitled to an education. So I guess, when you think of where we are today, there's lots of things for web browsers and other digital media where we have previously solved problems. So we have screen readers to read text. We have all sorts of tools that you add on to your existing computer to help with the assistive technology. So we know that in the area of XR, a lot of these are new challenges that we're trying to address. Can you speak to any of the accessibility issues that you maybe have seen or experienced in the industry?
Sure. Yeah, so I think that this is an area there's, I mean, the overall field is still nascent and still new in terms of becoming more mass produced. There's certainly been people working in this field for 50, 60 years, but in universities, in military, but having the technology be more available is still relatively new. And so I would say this area is, there's still a lot for the companies to learn. There's still a lot more that needs to be done. I would start there and still, but then I also will say I've seen some really really great outcomes. One of the location-based entertainment venues that we work with, and many of them are wheelchair accessible, and they are able to put the backpack on the back of a wheelchair and put the person in headset and enable the full experience. So whether that's experiencing the world of Terminator and saving the world, or going into a scuba diving experience, in some cases the way, and also of course it depends on what type of accessibility we're talking about, right? So it's certainly not a one size fits all, but I've seen some really powerful experiences where people are able to access and have experiences that, and in many cases, virtual reality experiences provide us experiences that all of us can't have in the world today. We're flying, none of us can actually fly. We're going to Mars, none of us can do that. And so, but there's quite a few of the location-based entertainment venues are set up to be accessible.
I mean, I just think that in some ways, VR and AR is what we're saying is an accessibility tool in and of itself. And I think it's always been part of the promise of this medium that it allows anyone from anywhere, whether that's, anyway, in your home, no matter where you are, you can put on a headset and be transported to a location, to a place that you aren't physically present at. And so I think that, so like I said, I think that this medium in general is a wonderful accessibility tool. And then I just want to point out that, one of the silver linings of this current situation with COVID-19 is that it's odd, like by its nature, made the world a more accessible place. There was a lot of complaining that, people who might not be able to go to a location have been asking for remote work for years, more remote work opportunities. And now the world is largely working remote. So I think even though it wasn't necessarily for the reasons that we would hope, we would want people to make these shifts because it's the right thing to do. One of the benefits and silver linings is that so many companies are now seeing the benefit of remote work, how easy remote work is. I think we're going to see a ton more opportunities for people in every field who might be disabled to now be a part of companies that have made the shift.
I also would add, I think there's some different questions popping up, but there's a lot of the technology is voice activated. So like our headset, which is Windows Mixed Reality, works with Cortana. So voice enablement is helpful. There's other headsets who've already enabled hand tracking, which and through that, some of them have programs to teach ASL and teach sign language. So I've seen some progress happening there, and so I think there's a number of different different companies and initiatives that have been focused on this. But I definitely would say still a lot more to come. You know, I think the headset, you know, all of our heads are different. All of our heads are shaped differently. And so that's, you know, that's been quite a challenge for a lot of the headset manufacturers to find, you know, a lot of the headsets, I think even tend to, in some cases, you know, and we're all working really hard on that, you know, how to
for a while, if you had glasses, you couldn't really do a headset, right?
Yeah.
And now that's gotten better. But I remember when we first started, like people with glasses couldn't really put it on.
Yeah, and so there's, you know, there's a couple ways you can work with that, right? You can either have somebody who get special lens for the headset. You can have you can you know, have the sweet spot on the headset such that maybe that you don't need glasses when you're wearing it, or you can make the headset big enough that that the glasses work. And so you know, I think there, you know, as I said, it's the industrial design teams, it's the R&D teams, the engineering teams, you know, working to make all of the technology as available for everybody as possible, and still early stage of that.
One thing I want to add in there, Jonathan, is, you know, one thing as a previous XR producer, when I look at companies like Metastage and HP, they're almost like the clay, and it requires that the creatives understand how to take that clay and ensure the accessibility is there. HP's headset has incredible hand tracking tools, and it's a lot of the times on the creatives to understand that focusing on accessibility isn't just another checkbox on your development schedule. It's actually going to make a better experience. The most recent example of this, and I'm so looking forward to seeing it in a HP Reverb G2 because it's going to look great, was our King Tut experience. Shout out to City Lights and Experience VR for making that possible. But when we were deploying this, we had to think about accessibility because we were selling tickets. Not only was it legally something that you had to do, but it was something that made the experience even better because we created a version. We used, shout out again to Positron. We had these chairs that you sit in that mimic motion, but a transfer to that chair might not be possible for everybody. And so for anybody that understands or has heard the term or has felt motion sickness in VR, a lot of that times it's due to the visuals show you're moving, but your body is not moving. It's discrepancy, interocular discrepancy between what's in your ear and what's your eyes are seeing. So we had to create a version that enabled people that could not transfer from their wheelchair to the chair that was simply cross dissolves. There was no motion, but you still got to experience it. We had people that were vision impaired or blind, and we made sure the sound was awesome and we could lead them to the chairs. And shout out to one of the founders of Positron, Jennifer Rundell, who really was my kind of the project spirit guide through all of the experiences she's done. And I assume Christina and Joanna have not only tried Positron once or twice, but probably 50 times, probably one of their best beta testers. So I do think that the big thing for the platforms, which is great, they keep adding all these technologies to the tools that we can use. But on the side of Diamond and City Lights, Experius, Felix and Paul, like all these great creatives, a lot of the weight relies on us to understand what's demanded of us, and not just for legal reasons, but because you're going to make a better experience. It's the right thing to do.
Yes. I have to back that up with, you know, my experience in the web application, mobile application side of the universe. You know, accessibility isn't just a list of things to check off a list, right? You have to fully understand the context of the medium that you're trying to work within. You also have to understand the technology, and in the per project, you know, what's the experience or what's the content? You have to understand all of it in a holistic view, so that you can use the technology to get as close to the intended experience using assistive technology or whatever else. And so it's really something that we focus on here at Diamond is that understanding that it's not about fix your accessibility, it's be accessible from the start. And think about it from the beginning so that you help to identify these areas that you can address as you're building out, you know, the content owner's dream. Excuse me. I think, you know, it's like an excellent topic that you brought up, Chadwick. We also touched on some voice interactions, and I think a couple times we've kind of gotten near the idea of, you know, what is the technology does exist and already inside those headsets, and then as Joanna mentioned, it's kind of each headset has slightly different abilities at this time. So it's going to be really interesting over time to see like the convergence of, you know, we use just a few screen readers across all the different web browsers on a laptop desktop, right? Like, will there be technologies like this that will cross platforms or cross head-mounted displays? That's really something I'm interested in keeping my eyes open for, and even engaging with organizations that are helping set standards for this. I know XR Access exists, and they are working on standards. Are either of you working with any standards organizations, or even not in accessibility, but what type of organizations are you working with to look at the future of this technology?
Yeah, as a company, we're working with quite a few. So I think we're working with OpenXR, and then we're also, but I mean, there's so many organizations. There's AIXR, there's VRARA. I mean, there's quite a few that have different standards and focal points. But I would say we're in one way or another involved with somebody in the company is involved with most of them. I think it's important. It's an important question. You know, a lot of the, you know, these sort of the openness of platforms versus, you know, the open ecosystem versus closed ecosystem. So far we've opted into the a more open ecosystem. Let's call it that way. You know, our technology is, you know, the latest technology that we just announced specifically is a partnership between HP and Microsoft and Valve. And so, you know, runs the tracking is Windows Mixed Reality, which is Microsoft, the audio and the optics and the ergonomics come straight from Valve. You know, HP has the largest portfolio of commercial VR, you know, ecosystem. And so it's the three great partners coming together to build something really great, each bringing what they're best at and what they're strongest at. And then additionally, since it is all three of us working together, you're able to access all of your Steam VR content through a bridge with Windows Mixed Reality. So it's, you know, it's you know, anyone who has content already on Steam, whether it's enterprise content or gaming content or entertainment content, it doesn't have to be ported to Windows Mixed Reality. For the most part, it just works. You know, you open Windows Mixed Reality and then you open Steam, and boom, you can access all of that great content. So as a company, we've tended to opt more into the open and accessible, you know, using that word in a different way, but, you know, or compatible ecosystems.
Yeah, and on that point, you know, we also try to be as agnostic as possible with our captures. We deliver in a couple different file formats. One is a proprietary codec that's an MP4 container, and then, you know, our partners at Microsoft and the tech team, like the goal is then to make those MP4 containers to get unique plugins that will help whatever platform we're working in read that file. We're trying to do it on as many platforms as we can. So we have Unity, Unreal, we're working with like ARKit and ARCore. And then additionally, we also deliver the OBJ and PNG sequences, which are much more like universal format. The only downside of the OBJ sequences is that they are not compressed. So they're full sized and quite large, whereas the MP4 containers are really compressed and small, and the audio is attached, so they're ready to go. So on our end, it's one of the mandates of the Microsoft Mixed Reality Capture Studios to build these plugins to be as universal as possible. And the challenge that we sometimes face is the partners letting, like, you know, us get under the hood to develop that unique plugin. You know, throw out to Snapchat. We're really still trying to get on, you know, the Snap SDK, like the Instagram SDK. If we get by on that side, then, you know, we're able to make it so that our pretty tiny files can then play on these various systems.
Awesome. So Chadwick, as our resident VR expert in our internally here, I'm going to ask you a question. Feel free to jump in, Joanna or Christina, but more think ahead. In 10 years, tablets and computers may still be the primary format, but where do you think AR glasses and VR headsets, do you think they're going to eclipse it?
This is great. I'm just going to stop you right there because this is my favorite topic. It's something I rant about all the time. Someone wants to talk about the weather. I'm like, yeah, imagine the weather with a pop-up screen that tells you it in your glasses, and it's just like the 5 companies that are going to dominate are still the 5 companies that dominate today: Amazon, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, and Amazon. Like, there will be other companies that show up, but those are going to be some of the strong ones. Now, with regards to HP, the reason why their Steam Microsoft HP alliance is really, really exciting is because HP has some of the best headsets. Microsoft has some of the best productivity tools. And we start talking about immersive gameplay. I am a 30+ year gamer, and Steam has always been my go-to place. Now, we don't have to talk about Epic because Epic's also awesome, but Steam, that trifecta is great. I'm also able to talk really big about what I think Microsoft's plans are, because both Christina and Joanna no doubt have been in meetings where they really know the plans, and I can just throw it out there. So all of this stuff about object recognition with these cameras on these fronts of these headsets, where we're talking about safety for consumers that can see, it's very cool. I don't bump into my coffee table anymore. But imagine when the batteries are good enough for me to wear this all day and I cannot see. I'm a person that is blind. Currently, the methods that those folks have access to are I'm not an expert in everything, but the walking stick, potentially a guide, dog. What if I had a computer that had captured the world, understood that is a crosswalk, that is a car, and I'm wearing it, and it's providing me audio cues, potential vibrations on like when danger is near. And what's interesting about what Christina is doing is they're truly recreating 3D objects that potentially can be fed into an artificial intelligence computer vision model that can say, that's a human. Go to the left, go to the right. Maybe there's 2 vibrations on these headsets that say, a little vibration to go this way, that way, and you can just kind of walk with your step. So what I am excited about when it comes to smart glasses, for me as just a consumer that I'm fairly able-bodied, et cetera, I have a lot of fun games that I'm excited to play. I can see my Pokemon anytime, anywhere. But with regards to accessibility, I think that you're going to see the paradigm similar to how I'm operating my desktop right now. This will be the computer. If you can see it through the green screen thing, my phone is the computer. The smart glasses will be my monitor. And so when people say, which one will I pick? I go, honestly, I think it's going to be like the smartwatch, where a lot of people will adopt it, but you'll still have your primary phone. And then maybe one day it'll be as common as a smartphone, because I assume everybody on the line, or a good portion of you, have seen a smartphone and probably own a smartphone. And it's not as if I can get rid of it. I work at a company that we have emails and Slack all day. So I need it. I need it to actually be a productive member. And I do think if we get smart glasses right, we stop being in this smartphone prayer position and we can be upright. But the inputs will have to be really, really well thought out. I know North, I think it's Bezos Expeditions back north, they have focals, but their input is with a ring. So scroll up, scroll down, tap once is right click, tap twice is left click. But again, we're starting to talk about using one's hands. What if you don't have the use of your hands available? Then that voice technology comes in. So loved the question. Would love to hear what Joanna and Christina can actually say about it. I know that we've all gone through our lists of NDAs with certain companies, but I think that the Microsoft side of things is incredibly exciting because of especially their productivity suite, that we will probably be able to collaborate in ways we've never thought of.
Microsoft's done some really great work around accessibility, specifically around gaming. I think they had a Super Bowl ad kind of focused on some of their work. So I won't comment on obviously on certain details but I will say that generally most people working in this field, I think, and most of the big tech companies do believe that we'll be using some sort of smart glass to interact with the world. It'll be the screenless future because the screens will be everywhere, and they'll be with us no matter where we're going, and they'll pop up all the information that you need, as all the productivity tools, your entertainment, and more. There is a really interesting company, speaking of the future, that we are working with. HP was one of the early investors in a company called Mojo Vision out of the Bay Area, who are creating contact lenses, and they're in so augmented contact lenses, and so they're actually focused as their first initiatives. They're working with the Vista Center for the Blind and Visually Impaired, and working on rehabilitation services for visually impaired, and so, or giving people who are low sighted the ability to to potentially rehabilitate their sight, or to make out more and more shapes in the future. So that's still a pretty, I would say, early-ish stage, but doing some amazing work specifically targeted and focused on accessibility, and certainly a company that we have great hopes for the future.
I can speak. I think for me, that at least from the lens in which we operate at MetaStage and the kind of work we do, I think that I would just want to bring it back to the education side. In-person, simulation training has been like kind of a standard for a long time, but again, in order to do it, that means that you had to maybe be at the school or the training facility in person in order to gain the benefit of the experience of that live simulation. We're starting to do projects at MetaStage where we bring in, actors and capture them doing whatever normally a live actor might do in a training simulation. And now what's cool is that, you can first perfect that performance. So, make sure that if it's, for instance, like a medical training simulation, that it is truly, accurate in terms of what, that you're trying to educate the student on. So again, getting the best performance possible from the best actor possible or expert possible. And then once that's done, now you have this digital file that anyone from around the world, assuming that they have the device. So let's fast forward a couple of years into the future when everybody has easy access to consumer AR glasses. Now a student in Bangladesh can train with the best material, the most effective simulations, just like somebody in, San Jose. And, again, for that's the promise, I think, of what this tech is going to enable in terms of allowing interested and motivated people from around the world to learn at the highest level.
Wonderful. And I want to thank everybody in the audience for submitting some really great questions. We're going to switch over to that because we're in the last few minutes of the presentation today. The first question that popped up kind of popped into my mind when I'm reading them all, and it's a little bit of a segue, but we haven't really touched on this topic. It seems really interesting. Linda Selesky says, one maybe less common accessibility issue is people who have migraines and other vestibular disorders not being able to use VR without consequence. What are your thoughts for that population?
I'm a fan of use whatever the best tool for the job is. I can't speak to I don't know, maybe Joanna can chime in on how the headset people are dealing with that. But as somebody who gets motion sick super easily, now I know it's a little bit different, but I'm one of those very sensitive VR users. And so I will only do experiences that I know aren't going to adversely affect me and make me sick. So I can't fly around the VR worlds or anything like that because I eventually just have to take the headset off. I think that that's a very real issue, and I don't know that there's an easy solution for it. And so in that case, maybe VR AR wouldn't be the best tool for you to be able to learn most effectively. Although I don't want to forget about the audio aspect that, we were talking about earlier. There's a lot of AR, audio AR is just as significant and might end up even being more significant in our AR future than just the graphics appearing in front of our eyes. So hopefully that will make it easy for people to participate in augmented reality experiences that don't want the visual aspect because it might affect them or give them a headache.
I'm glad you mentioned the audio VR also because, I think back to childhood even, and this concept of binaural sound, right? And I was at a theme park waiting in line to see Mr. Lincoln, and they put this headset on you in the beginning, and it sounds and feels like you're in a room. You close your eyes, you couldn't tell you're not in a barber shop getting prepped for your chance to meet the president. And that is well over, we'll just say well over 10 years ago. But, especially lately, every headset I put on, there's a lot of attention put into that spatial audio and that 3D sense of where I'm at. I can totally, I can't speak for myself, but I think I could understand how that would mess with somebody's motion as well.
And haptics too, like the idea that like if you were like making a turn that you shouldn't make, you might be able to get a buzz or something that alerts you like, oh, don't, like you said, don't turn there. So it's an augmented reality, you know what I mean? And an augmentation means a lot of things, not just visual augmentation.
Yeah, and Linda, who asked the question, it's a very, very good question. And you may not have known, it actually touches very close to home for me. I have a parent with vertigo issues and another parent who suffers frequent migraines, and they both now have headsets in their homes. And so I'm just about to get into that world and find out what their experience is.
Jonathan, I'll add a couple points, and it actually also ties back to kind of the refresh of these headsets. It's another shout out to like what HP's doing with the reverb, but it boils down to some people will experience issues when it was really, really low quality resolution. I was in my DK1, it looked like a light bright on my face, but I fell in love. I could see the pixels. These things are now 2K per eye. The refresh rate's getting better. Some people might have a flicker effect where I think the Quest is like 72 Hertz. We got 90 on the HP reverb, okay? And then also something with regards to sound, something we didn't even think about a long time ago in a previous life. We did a VR film festival with Kaleidoscope, and something that we forgot within an hour, we fixed it, but was to ensure all of the people put the right ear on the right ear and the left ear on the left ear, because you're talking about sound. And then this was back in like 2014 or 15. If you switch the speakers on your headphones, you're seeing things off to your left happening, but you're hearing it in your right. I don't suffer from any motion sickness, but you can quickly understand that every body is physiologically different. The last big piece is the content. Just like everything else, that if you watch, let's say, a Tarantino film and it's too fast for you, maybe it doesn't cause sickness, but it's not for you. When people create these pieces of work, it is the first time it's not letterbox, it's fully immersive around you. And if it's jump cuts and motion and you are sitting still, there's a good chance you are going to suffer from some sort of motion sickness. So never do anything that makes you feel bad and makes you have migraines, of course. But as the technology progresses, as the auteurs get better with the format, and potentially as we could start mimicking motion with visuals, I think that we're going to slowly start to see this substantial conversation about motion sickness be a little bit more specific to people just really can't use that tool. And I don't think screens are going away by any means. You're always going to have screens in your house.
There's also certain content that is specifically created both for certain use cases, as well as there's content in games that have been created to help improve people's sight, for example. And so there might, I'm not familiar in the case of if there's any content built to help specifically train on the brain and to decrease migraines, but we know that there's content that's created to decrease PTSD. There's content that's been created to improve hearing. There's content that's been created to address ADHD, virtual reality or augmented reality content. There's content that's been, there's content that's been created to address phobias. So on that specific use case, I'm not familiar, but that A, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, and B, it doesn't mean that it wouldn't exist in the future, particularly if there is a great need for it.
Yeah. So I think I want to move on to another question. Thank you guys so much. Sadiq Shahidian says, are there ways XR could be used to help abled people empathize with the experiences of people facing AL11Y challenges? And before we get there, I just want to point— a lot
of answers.
Yeah, so many answers. I was literally last year, I downloaded an experience that's called Traveling While Black. And it was intended to be a empathy experience for folks, and I've heard a lot of feedback about how empathy, like using VR for empathy, is a dangerous scenario. But back on the can it work? You know, could a VR headset be used to help people empathize with folks, people with disabilities?
Yeah, there's a friend of both of ours, Carrie Shaw, and who's the CEO and founder of a company called Embodied Labs. And there's other companies doing this, but I'm going to use her as an example. And we also work with her on a professional basis. You know, she often uses our technology. And so her story, her origin story in VR is also really inspiring. Her mother sadly had Alzheimer's as well as macular degeneration. I think when she was still in school, and they had brought in long-term caregivers, but didn't have the right tools to train the long-term caregivers in terms of, you know, what her mother was experiencing. And because of her macular degeneration, she could only see like half the plate of food. If you approached her from one side, it would scare her because she couldn't see you coming from that side. And so Carrie actually went out and created these glasses to show, you know, kind of what her mother was seeing, and give them to any of the long-term caregivers who came there, so they could understand what her mother was experiencing with the macular degeneration and the Alzheimer's. And then she went on to create this company that puts you inside a VR experience. They're each called a lab. Each one is based on a person. This one, I think that one's called Alfred. The first one on macular degeneration, and it's to train long-term caregivers, whether they be professional in an environment where people go to live, or there are people coming into the home, or just somebody who is interacting with somebody, with Alzheimer's or macular degeneration. And since then, she's gone on. She's created a SaaS product. They're in hundreds of they're training people in hundreds of locations around the country, and they've also created experiences around end of life, in addition to Alzheimer's and macular degeneration. And I think they're training now on somebody who's going through transgender, and so it's going through the transition, and so training people around that. And there's they have quite a number of other experiences that they're creating, and so that entire experience is designed using the power of virtual reality to have people who are going to be around and caring for be better at providing care.
Wonderful.
There's also a pretty famous VR experience called Notes on Blindness, which gives the users the experience of a world beyond sight.
Yes, if somebody's going to try that one, I highly recommend you download the full app version versus the 360 video version, because it's way more immersive and has some really cool features.
Well, with that in mind, something I want to say is we have a lot of great questions left over, but I know that some of our panelists do have to jump. Joanna, if you want to start first, just kind of final thoughts and potentially where people can follow you. And then Christina, you'll be up next.
Sure. Thank you everyone for coming today. Thank you for hosting us. It's been great. The questions are so fantastic, and really, really important things for the industry to be focused on. So thank you all. Best way to follow up with me, I'm at Joanna Popper on all of the different platforms. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. We are, if you're interested in learning more about HP's products, it's hp.com. Our latest one is hp.com/reverb. They're already it's for sale. For the pre-orders for the US are already ready and going. So if you go to that website, you can grab your pre-order, and they're opening up around the rest of the world in the next weeks as well. And if you're interested in more information on the backpacks and everything else, you can find it at our site too. So thank you for hosting us, and thank you for all of the great questions and interest. And I think that there's a lot more to be done in this area, and really, really important topics. So thanks for hosting us.
Thanks for being here.
My final thought is that our technology is only as good as what we do with it. I think it's been really exciting to see in the last even just couple weeks how these technology companies are starting to understand that concept. And like I saw this morning that Google's going to be deleting location data after 18 months, almost like a little bit of it seems like a stance against surveillance culture. We've also seen Twitter starting to do more monitoring of hateful content and taking it down. And then I think IBM made some interesting revelations recently around not developing technology that could be used for nefarious purposes. And so I just want to say that, as we move into the VR and AR world, let's carry that torch with us and use it for, good causes and good work, and also call out things that we think are not the best use of this tech. And as companies, make sure that we don't participate in advancing those kinds of aims. And then, if you're interested in volumetric video and volumetric capture, you can find us at metastage.com. We're also on Twitter as MetastageXR, Instagram at just Metastage. And you can also shoot us an email, team@metastage.com, and it goes to me and my colleague Leo, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Thank you for having us today. And Joanna, it was great to see you and great to chat with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much to everybody. I want to give a quick shout out to Mindy and Greenberg, but both of you could also be on some of our future panels. So email inbound, and thank you for your questions. Sorry they didn't get answered, but if you need to contact us, you can follow us at diamond.la. And Jonathan, your final thoughts, and then I guess we'll be done.
Yeah, I also see a few friends of mine out there in the audience. So, thank you everybody for joining today. Those of you who left questions in the Q&A, we're going to go through those after this, and we have your signups. We'll try to get back to you today or soon. There are several organizations that were mentioned in the Q&A, like XR Access, Equal Entry, and others. So in our follow-up email, we'll list some of those so folks can learn a little bit more about the organizations working on standards and accessibility touching the space. So thanks again, everybody, for joining today, and have a great evening.
Thank you, Kate.
Oh yes, thank you, Kate. Thank you to the closed captioner.
Yeah, great job, Kate.
All right, bye everybody.
Wonderful.
Bye, thanks.
Have a great day, and thanks for joining Diamond Webinars.